Nowhere to run. We're going to talk a little about runoff erosion and maybe a little bit more. So runoff and sediment control, topics that I haven't covered yet. Remember, runoff erosion is Junior and his gang, and then shear stress is how many juniors there are and how thick they are and how much damage they're doing and how much their skateboards weigh, how fast they're going. So name some runoff control BMPs, I'll do it for you. I don't work in these areas at all. There are some energy dissipators. It could be rock line ditches, overside drains, water bars. I kind of like the environmental opportunities that allowed to be done with grass line channels and turf reinforcement mats. And then I do a lot of, I started my work removing logging roads in the Pacific Northwest. There's like 30 miles of logging road per square mile in some of the watersheds I've worked in that are very steep watersheds. And every one of those, every tree that was harvested out of the Northwest where I'm at had a bulldozer hooked to it to pull it out of the woods. So you can imagine the amount of roads leading to pulling the lumber out, and then they just left the roads. And the alterations to the hydrologic hill slope drainage patterns was tremendous. All of that sediment is being delivered. Dikes and berms, water bars, rolling dips I like, water bars I don't like. Curbs and gutters, you know, I'd save my plastic on that. But runoff can be very, very serious, as you see here. I wonder if highway departments, you know, they build roads like this is in New Mexico. They build roads and they will drain an entire, what do you call it, a arroyo or whatever, a big giant area into one culvert. And very serious, causes big erosion. Look at that. Now, I don't know what this is from, to tell you the truth, but look at this guy. He obviously went through, he must have been drunk, maybe not drunk, somehow impaired. Very lucky though. He went through the guardrail, bounced over here, turned out here, and did not turn up down there. It's a good time to go to Reno, huh? Now, I don't know if I'm sure that gully existed before the highway department ever built that box culvert. So, you know, sometimes you have to use gabion baskets, but gabion baskets, these things last, the study's been done, they last 15 years now. There's abrasion and corrosion. They have zinc coated, most of them. If you put the polyplastic coating on them, there you go, plastic again, you get another 7 years out of them. But if they're abraded, they could be failing. You generally use gabions because all you have is little rock and you don't have big rock, so you have to encapsulate the little rock to make it act like a big rock. Overside drains, energy dissipators for the outlets of your pipes. I have an alternative, but it's plastic. It's HDPE. So I want to show you that one. It's on this one here. Nothing like a devil's advocate to make me think. Thank you very much. That was a good. By hitting the rock. The rock provides so much roughness. We've excavated down here. We will cover this with a really high strength and permanent turf reinforcement mat. And then we're going to lay our rock apron on here. Right about here, Matt. Okay, so before we put our rock energy dissipator down, in here, filling it with rock, a little bit more. So what we have here is okay. So it's much stronger. The whole becomes stronger than the individual piece. Yeah. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change gears. So that's a typical energy dissipator, rock with an underlayment to energy transition. The scour stop is made out of HPDE. It's a high-density plastic. It's much lighter than concrete. You know, these are very light sheets to put down. They're 4x4 sheets. And we put these guys down and replace the cement apron, and we actually grow
for the storm. We've got this is a 1,500 gallon tank we have.
Let's go back a little bit, Adam.
We've got it about part full. We got about the scour stop apron down, and then we just anchor it in place. And they have some really cool new patented devices for anchoring these things that make them really, really easy to anchor.
Now pause for a second.
So, and then you,
if you can imagine now, let's put on our post-construction, where's Rich? Put on our post-construction hats, where remember post-construction, we're trying to get water to infiltrate, more water to infiltrate. We've got enough developments. And so what about if you had a ditch? What about this culvert and it drained a subdivision? It drained down into an area that we could put a scour stop on there. What if I decompacted the soil and I made the entire ditch that could have 20 feet per second at times? At the rest of the time, it was going to have low flows and it would absorb all the pollutants. So I dig down, I build engineered media for the bottom of the ditch. I put the turf reinforcement mat down. I put the scour stop, which has been tested at 21 feet per second. I put it down. They have openings in it. You grow the perennial grasses native to the area with large, long roots. And then it outfalls into an area with a TRM that also has native grasses with deep roots. So during first flushes and the low flows, all of the water will infiltrate, or a lot of the water will infiltrate. We can maintain high infiltration rates. At the same time, we can have 20 feet per second flowing through. So that's what these kinds of techniques would allow us to do. Okay, go ahead.
Spread out, it's more laminar flow. Okay, give it half a increase the velocity a little bit, see what's going on. Again, there's no real turbulent flow. It's laminar flow. Go ahead and crank this thing all the way open. Let's see what we got. Okay, take her back to a half a tank, and let's have a half out of the other one also. Let's run them both side by side.
So two ways you can do outlets to culverts. Also, Alberta DOT is using the scour stop as down drains. And again, these can be vegetated with native grasses. Other runoff control, there's velocity checks that you can put in ditches to stop the velocity, slow the velocity down. But once you build a check dam in a ditch, you're going to have some erosion. Check dams are an anomaly in the stream system. So you want to be very careful if you build a velocity check that they're very low to the ground. Here's a shallow, low gradient, no high velocities anticipated in this median strip in Reading. And so they're just using grasses. This one, I'm sorry, you can't see it. The fiber rolls were used across this ditch and they blew all over. They should have used the rope and twine method to anchor them. So this TRM, this is the Inca mat right here, and we sprayed it down at this off-highway vehicle park, and then I had to remove this piece of it. This is only 2 months old. So this is the piece that can now withstand 21 feet per second, higher velocity than articulated concrete blocks. 21 feet per second, and articulated concrete blocks start lifting. They start going through that and lifting and vibrating, cavitating, and this will last longer than that. So high velocities can be had. Kind of exciting. This is Inca mat back in the day, 94, first time I ran into it, using native material with it. So the idea is with a lot of TRMs is you want to use them until you can get the grass to grow, right? You don't want the ditch eroding until the grass gets established. So you need something to protect the ditch. Do you need to use plastics? No, you could use, there's biodegradable materials now. Here's a median strip. This one is using not a biodegradable. This actually is coconut, but the netting is plastic. But then the vegetation grows and you're done. I told you already about when you put your TRMs in, make sure you have, at 20 feet, you have a check slot or a double row of staples. That's critical to have these things working properly. You can see where the protection, I told you I lined the ditch to be fair at Shasta College. We had a very hard clay soil. And to make it look like I put 6 inches of decomposed granite, highly permeable, has a maximum permissible velocity of 2 feet per second. So once it exceeds 2 feet per second, it erodes. And yet we were able to protect that, even that granite, with the blanket. And this is where the protection stopped. And it eroded the 6 inches of granite. Used a large gully on Highway 2 in Canada, all the way down to Willow Creek from up in the highway. All the way down to the creek was one large gully, and it was still cutting. And so we lined it and treated it with a turf reinforcement mat. Articulate concrete blocks. In my community, we've been, instead of having culverts, we've been doing some of our stormwater practices as removing culverts and going back and doing areas that can receive more stormwater. So these are post-construction BMPs. Here's one that I replaced a culvert with an articulate concrete block, draining so it drains so water can go in between the blocks. It can go on the Inca mat and then the scour stop, and then we have Inca mat with native grasses. And that's the way it looks when it was built. And then it withstood several high flows. And it withstood that high 8 inches in 4 hours flow. Look at that. And after that big flood, it's still in place. We have native grasses now holding everything together. This is 12 years later. That's still in place. Let's talk about sediment control BMPs a little bit. Are you all familiar with Stokes' Law? You know Stokes' Law? Anybody raise your hand if you know Stokes' Law. Stokes' Law says that sediment will settle out of suspension based on its density and particle size and the temperature of the water. So if I had a little water bottle here and I put some dirty dirt in it, added water, shook it up and set it down, what's the first thing that's going to fall out of suspension? Sand, then maybe after an hour or so, silt, and maybe never clay. And it depends on which kind of clay. And some of the clays actually clay particles have a negative charge. So when they come in contact with each other, they repel each other. They're like 2 negative ends of a battery. They repel each other. And those are the ones where maybe we need some flocculants to go into them. But the critical thing is it doesn't say anything about filtering. It says that you need a pond. So if you're really going to do sediment control, you need water in your pond, and it needs to settle out. You need water, you need detention time, you need a travel distance. And so, like if you had say a curb, and you had 2 gravel bags in the curb, and muddy water's running, it's during the storm, muddy water's running down the curb. What's the detention time of the water behind those gravel bags? Second, how effective are they? See, during the storm event, the peak, the hydrograph, it's rising, and now it's flowing full speed. That sediment is going in there and it's going out just as fast as it comes in. But maybe on Saturday morning you come by and at the tail end of the hydrograph, the last little bit can't get by and it traps it. So you got a shovelful after the storm is all done. And you go, wow, these things work great. I get a shovelful here, a shovelful there. But what you didn't know is that you had 1,000 or 100 cubic yards going through the system. And you didn't know it was there. Great. Silt fence with a catenary curve versus a silt fence that went around the perimeter of 1 acre, directed all the water into 1 acre. Would you ever design for me a sediment pond that held 1 acre and the bankment was made out of sticks and cloth? It's silly when you think about it. We could have taken a bunch of catenary curves in here and we could have trapped this in a bunch of different, you'd use even less silt fence. if we just done a couple of these kinds of things. And we directed all the water to the low point of the site, and there's a storm drain right there. A little bit about tracking controls. I said I would talk about it. Are tracking controls important here? Are you having to do tracking controls? Yeah, okay. So basically what we have for tracking controls, and you probably already know it, is we have a rock apron, or we have nothing. And that's a good way to get called because the Clean Water Act just loves to, they act on complaints, and that's a good way to get Aunt Josephine and Uncle Bob to call in when you let mud on their road, and then it turns to dust in the sunny afternoon. And so we got to do something. A 50-foot rock apron is one way of doing it. Now, my experience has been you got this 20-foot rock apron, and it could work if the rocks are angular enough. It's tricky. They have to be angular. If you get a lot of 6-inch rocks, they can get caught between the dualies of the truck and then get out on the roadway and toss those 6-inch rocks out. So you need a lot of like 4-inch angular rock. I tried it with subangular. It didn't work very well. What I like to do, and Caltrans has found also that the contractor comes out, lays the geotextile down, lays 6 inches of rock down, and it doesn't take long for that to get filled with mud. Now, what do you do once you get filled with mud? You go back to the highway department, the contractor goes back and says, I need another one. And you're paying $1,100 to build one. So I want another one. And where does all that plastic and rock go? What do you do with the old one that got dirty? They have to haul it off to the landfill, right? So they have to get rid of it. So what I'm saying is this: if you want to be environmentally sensitive, I want you to follow the specs that they actually have on these things. Is make sure your contractor digs them down 6 to 12 inches, your subgrade. Make sure your subgrade drains to a point that's not the road or not critical. Your subgrade drains. Then you put your geotextile down. If a storm comes, it's going to drain out. It's going to go down the geotextile and drain out. Then you fill it with your 12 inches of rock or 6 inches of rock. And you use it. And where it drains, it's going to, when a storm comes, it's going to wash the rock and drain off into a place. You can direct that into a small little sediment pond. You can use Filtrex socks. You can use something. You build a little embankment. You can use silt fence. You have your own little sediment pond there. Now, it gets plugged up really bad. So you park on it with a water truck and you wash it. And you wash it out the drain and you reuse it then. You know what I mean? Don't pay $1,100 for the second one. There's no incentive for the contractor to make these things work if you're going to pay for the second one and the third one and the fourth one. Right? Now, if the rock doesn't work, you bump it up one. Well, you should always have sweeping or sweeping available. And then you bump it up one, you put a rumble strip on it, right? And the same thing. The same thing goes with the rumble strip. You want those, put the strip on an angle so they drain and they wash off. And then they wash into an area that you have some control over. And then if the rumble strips don't work, then have you had to do this? Anybody had to do this yet? The wheel wash? And Caltrans had to do these on some really critical sites down in Orange County. So that could be really costly. So there's a rumble strip. This one's draining off into that area. We'll hope that's some kind of drain area. A little piece of rumble strip like that might not do much, but there you can see where it drains off to over here. You want to play this video? And I'll have you fast forward as we go through. How much time do I have? 5? Okay. We're going to build one in Shasta College.
Time. Today's episode is stabilized construction entrances.
Okay, down over here.
Required on most construction sites. Today we're going to learn how to build. Drive into the pond, you'll wash the tires, and then you drive up onto the rock to kind of drip dry them. So those are the... Now, particularly from this point, this rock and anything falling off on the rock will drain that way through the rock and under the rumble strip. But right in here particularly, the rumble strips are going to be draining this way. And they're going to be draining this way, and they're going to be picked up into about a 3-foot wide drainage channel.
So there's one.
So
with
an industry
2
standard
Texas
is
and rock.
50 feet long. The way they calculated that is it's supposed to be 4 times the tire should travel 4 times around. Now, how someone came up with that, I don't know if there's any research that was really done, but if you take, remember from your math, the circumference equals 2 pi r. So the radius of a typical tire is going to be 20 inches. They're 40 inches high, so that radius equals 20 inches. So now we have 2 times pi times radius, 20 inches, equals, this will be the same as 3. 2 times 3 is 6, 120 inches. That's the same as 10 feet, right? Okay, 120 inches equals 10 feet. We want 4 times around. We want the tire to rotate 4 times. Times 4 equals 40 feet. So roughly we want to make these things 40 or 50 feet long.
I can do math
Caltrans
sometimes.
says 4 times
Let's
minimum.
advance it a little bit.
So we make them 50 feet if you trap here. So it's all going to drain down into here, and we'll keep it on site.
Let's watch it run down here, Adam.
Okay, we got our sediment trap in place. I mean, we're all ready. We're going to
Here we go. We're all ready.
stabilize construction entrance with a bunch of water, and then we're going to play in the mud here. We're going to get that thing all muddy and then running down into our sediment trap right here. You know what I'm really excited about is all that subsurface drainage work we did is really paying off. Underneath the rumble strip here, we've got it, filled with water now, and it is draining down into the sediment pond. So you can see these truly are going to be self-cleaning. They're not going to fill up with mud. We're going to be able to wash these guys.
Okay, that's my point I wanted to make. If I'm not going to say much about curb inlet protection, although with Caltrans we spent a lot of time developing what they wanted to see, especially to be used. They even made orange bags. Now these are woven, and now they've decided that they've gone to non-woven bags. And they're filled with about 35 pounds of clean gravel. Southern California, a lot of times they use sandbags. They put the sand bags right in front of a storm inlet. Sand is the most deleterious substance you could put in a stream system. And so you're putting these sandbags, and they were those white bags, polypropylene, they white plastic kind of bags that break down in 60 days. And you're putting sand, you might as well be dumping the dump trucks right in the creeks. Anyway, so this is the way I would recommend doing it. You build it. Don't plug up the storm drain. Storm drains are supposed to pass water. And so you build it like this. You have a spillway right here. The sediment laden water comes down, circles, does a little dance, ponds right here, goes over the spillway, sheet flows over and goes in. That's about as good as it can get. And everything is visible. You can see when they need maintenance. They're not sticking out in the street. They're just like that. That one, the spillway is wrong. The spillway should be back up in here. And fill those with gravel bags. The next thing I want to talk about then is the sediment pond. How many minutes do I have? No minutes. Okay. In New Zealand, they use skimmers. They use what's called decanters. We have what's called now a skimmer outlet, so that pond will actually fill up with water. Let me show you a pond here this is along the side of a highway, so the water comes down the ditch right here. The silt fence is a baffle. The water has to go through the baffle. This skimmer has a little tiny orifice in it. I could put a 1/2-inch orifice in it, and so all the water, the storm comes, it can't run through the skimmer, so the skimmer floats to the top of the surface. I can design it so that pond holds water for 24, 48 hours. It's already flown a long way. As soon as the water comes, this pond is filled with water, and a lot of times the sediment just falls in the first 2 chambers. You can see how it falls in the chambers. When you can get this kind of deposition, you know they're working well. Okay, so the fair cloth, and there's another skimmer now. Skimmer devices are the way to make small ponds work. All right, any questions?